Views and opinions expressed within the following program are solely those of the individual. These views and opinions do not necessarily represent those of Shaw TV.
Hey Calgary, I'm Kevin Chorney. Today is Thursday, February 28th, and this is Calgary Now. Affordable housing. It's both a way to prevent homelessness and poverty and a solution to homelessness and poverty. The common definition of affordable housing is essentially that the cost of housing should not exceed 30% of one's income. For many low to median income Calgarians, this means home ownership, even renting at market level, is a real challenge, where any unexpected financial burden could leave a family homeless, unable to pay a rent or their mortgage. It's a key component to every poverty reduction initiative and plans to end homelessness, yet communities across the country fall short in providing enough affordable housing options to meet the needs of Canadians. As nonprofit organizations partner up with all levels of government and pressure is being put on home builders to create affordable housing, where does Calgary stand in providing affordable housing options to those who need it? Our city has a very healthy real estate market, so much so that perhaps the promise of top dollar for newly developed properties and a rental property landscape with one of the lowest vacancy rates in the country has resulted in affordable housing taking a back seat to a market ripe with financial opportunity. Property owners have every right to expect a fair market value whether selling or renting. However, as the cost of living increases, many citizens are becoming vulnerable and at risk of homelessness. Subsidized housing initiatives are not always a welcome addition to neighborhoods, and developers don't always see the financial sense in the incentives offered by the city's attempt to create new affordable dwellings. So, what are the real options available to aid in the growth of affordable housing? I'm sitting down with those in the know in just a few seconds here to discuss. As always, we welcome your phone calls at 403-539-6710 or join the discussion via Twitter at Calgary Now Show. Stay with us.
Affordable housing is something that can happen in Calgary if the city, in conjunction with developers, actually step up to the plate, put restrictions and requirements on developments in high-density areas that allow for transitional and affordable housing. There's a certain element of pride in ownership, and if you can harvest that, give people the opportunity to earn that pride, and then allow them to move on, affordable housing is going to be successful in Calgary.
Welcome back to the show. Tonight we have former Alderman Joe Ceci, current Government Relations Manager with Momentum, Dan Van Leeuwen, President and CEO of New Urban Consulting, and Sarah Arthurs from the Alberta Co-operative Housing Association. Thank you all so much for being here. I'll start with you, Joe. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you're from?
Yeah, I'm originally from Toronto, but came out here in 1980. I've been a social worker all my life, and in 1995 I decided to run for council, and I got elected. Did that for 15 years, and since stepping down from council, I've been working on a poverty reduction initiative at the provincial level, and recently got hired by Momentum to bring that work in-house and to do public policy for them as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Not at all.
Dan, yourself?
I'm also originally from Toronto, and got in the development business through growing up in the construction business. My father had a construction company.
Spent a number of years in the United States doing development and came back to Calgary in 2002. I went on my own, started my own company about 5 years ago, and we've been focusing on normal commercial and real estate development, and also started an affordable housing division that does shared equity home ownership.
I was reading about your company, very interesting company. Look forward to learning a little bit more. Sarah, tell us about yourself.
Well, my name's Sarah Arthurs, and I'm with the Alberta Community and Co-operative Association.
Community and
Co-operative Association. Typo, yes. So, so that's a kind of umbrella organization for all the co-ops in Alberta, and that includes co-op housing. So I'm here to kind of share a little bit about what co-op housing has to offer in terms of other options for folk. And
it's fascinating too. We'll get to that in just a few moments here. So to start things off, Joe, maybe I'll throw the question your way. Are developers, they got a bit of a rap as being maybe somewhat of a greedy bunch. I know it's kind of a dirty word, but is the city not doing enough to offer incentives for developers to include affordable housing in these new housing projects that we see?
Yeah, I generally agree with that statement. I think...
Which one, that they're greedy or not enough incentive?
I'll agree with the sentiment that the city needs to be more into this whole role of affordable housing. And as an owner of affordable housing, as an incentive, incentivizing the private industry to do that, and as a regulator to do a better job of taking the handcuffs off private developers or private landlords who want to do things like secondary suites.
Absolutely. As a developer, Dan, I'm sure you can attest. I mean, your company's a bit different though, because you have put a real effort forth to provide some affordable housing.
Yeah, you know, I think developers, as a whole, you know, we are like any other business, a bank, for example. We are looking at the bottom line. We are taking risk capital and risk monies, and we're trying to make a return on it. Now, a lot of developers give developers a bad name, so I'd say what we've tried to do in distinguishing ourselves is we do very well in our private development, and we think part of the responsibility of good developers is not just to build an individual project, but work on building a city. And part of that is giving back in a constructive way a means and opportunity for people to continue to build up equity and wealth within the properties they buy. So in our not-for-profit division, what we really try to do is give people the means to afford a place that will build equity. So we want to build high-quality, affordable housing, and we want to get off the government subsidy train. We actually don't look for money from government. We look for other means of using developers' intuitive ways of working, what we can do with leveraging assets to make things affordable. So I agree with Joe. Is you know, it's a cooperation, I guess, between the government, and it's also the way that you get developers to work with you. And I think that can change a lot about how people view development and how it works.
And you mentioned that there's, you know, a few developers that give the rest of the pile maybe a bit of a bad name. Now, Sarah, what do you think? Does the city need to maybe start requiring developers to include affordable housing in these developments?
Well, I certainly think there's a role for affordable housing. There's a role for co-op housing. I mean, I think there are ways the city could be creatively involved with that in terms of providing land, leased land, where co-op housing could be built. Right now there's 16 housing co-ops in Calgary, and they have 8 to 380 units. But those were all built during the 70s when it was a federal government initiative to create housing co-ops. So there haven't been any new since then. So in terms of having that as an option for people who maybe are not interested in getting equity through their home ownership, maybe they're interested in, you know, having their homes a different way and using their equity in other ways.
And Prairie Sky is cool like that. This is a fascinating arrangement that's going on there. Before I jump into that, though, Joe, I see you're nodding your head. You think maybe that developers should be required to include affordable housing with their developments? Yeah,
and this is, I hope it's not too much of a left turn from what I said previously, but I do think that the City of Calgary and most Canadian municipalities are quite timid in the way they approach the affordable housing file. So I think if they had more requirements and they were clearly laid out to developers and all developers were treated the same, that there wouldn't be any of the kind of one-off trading that sometimes happens. But I also think there are ways to ensure the development industry gets something out of that. They're going to have to give up, and that's how I would be seeing it. They have to give up some things, but they would get greater assurance in their development going through. Maybe they're incentivized or the city buys a part of that development. Maybe there's other ways to ensure that it's not just the developers giving up, but it's the city making sure that they're getting affordable housing throughout the city in mixed units, in units all across the city where that can happen. So I'd like to see this city take steps to zone throughout the whole city affordable secondary suites. Edmonton's done it, there's other cities that have done it. We haven't done it because we're frankly afraid of not getting re-elected the next time out.
And it's a real threat, is it?
Yeah, single-family residences have been that bastion of that group who have said, you know, you're not coming in my area. Don't even try. And I think that's wrong because we have to look out for the greater good of the whole city. Absolutely. And not just property owners who own single-family residences.
So, Dan, I'm going to ask you then, if the city were to require you, what's the barometer? I mean, what's the feeling, I guess, amongst developers?
Oh yeah, I think Joe said it I think Joe said it correctly, which is you can require it, but if there's no trade on the other side, developers will go against it. Again, it comes down to the pro forma and the bottom line. So I agree with the concept that it should be required, but as Joe says, in a fair and even way. One of the things that we look for in any business, whether it's development or whether it's anything else, is certainty of the process and certainty of a level playing field. Yeah. When you do see one-off deals, and there's been a few in town that have made people upset, when you see one-off deals that looks like someone's getting a favor over what you're doing under the rules, that really gets people upset. Not so much about I didn't make as much money, but I was unsure what the process was. I may not have been politically connected enough to get the good deal. If you can get the zoning, if you can get the requirements to be a level playing field where you understand the rules, then yes, you can focus on how to bring that. But I'm somewhat against requirements. I'm for them if they're a baseline, but I think developers can do more with creative solutions. I think one thing that government can also look at is how can you leverage developers' knowledge when they come up with let's say a better idea. And that's one way to do it. So I think it's a combination. There's no one solution to this affordable problem. We have such a need. There's so many different ways to do it. But I do agree that cities should take it upon themselves to create a baseline set of rules. And those should be applied to all developers. And then you'll simply raise the game of the development community. And I think that is helpful.
You mentioned the one-off deals. And it's definitely been well publicized as of late, with Mayor Nenshi really going on the defensive, I suppose, with regards to his interaction with developers. Now, it would seem that his refusal to meet individually and to try and keep things by committee would maybe curb those concerns. Not really what's been echoed, though, in the developers community.
It's probably not wise for me to get into a discussion about what the mayor is saying right now. However, I think what's being lost in what seems to be a big argument, I think what's being lost is the idea that the only place to have affordable housing, in other words, the only place to make Calgary affordable is a suburban house that is further out, therefore cheaper, isn't necessarily true. When we study other markets where we're bringing our affordable housing, we look at the net cost of housing, which includes transportation. So we take the cost of your house and the cost of your transportation to work, just those two costs together, to get a barometer of what it really costs you to live in a house. So in suburban Washington, your house may cost you by mortgage less than rent within the city, but your cost of transportation means your overall gross income, you're spending 52 on just getting to work and living. And that is a crazy percentage. So yes, suburban development is good for the city growth. Yes, I think we need to look at it, but it isn't the only place to make life cheaper.
Yeah, and the place where schools are and services are, as we all know, is in the inner city. Till they get blown up, exactly, or till they get closed because there's not enough children. Yeah. But I think that's I certainly know with Sunny Hill Housing Co-op down in Kensington that they were one of the reasons that the local school was able to stay open, was because they were providing a base of children that were coming into the community and able to keep it going over a period of time when it was kind of losing enrollment. So I think the role that the city can play is to kind of provide for some diversity of housing options, whether people want to live in co-op housing or they want to live in a condo or they want to live in, single family dwellings. There needs to be some opportunity for diversity around that.
Right, what we've always called that is mixed use, mixed tenure. And so it's a mix of uses, it's a mix of different types of product within a development, and a mix of tenure being everything from rent to ownership. And I think that's a model that's been successful in a lot of U.S. cities, where they encourage developers through certain incentives, which are, again, a baseline guarantee to create a greater diversity of housing options within its own development. So again, this idea that there's only a one solution fix is just, it doesn't happen in normal life. So it can't happen in the development of a city either. You can't just have a one fits-all solution.
So I want to bring something up here.
I'll let you can jump in. Just give me a moment here. We're going to take a quick break. Folks, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Check out what our resident Rant Pack has to say.
Affordable housing is a big deal issue in Calgary, where people who really need to buy a home but have limited resources, their needs have to be balanced off against the desires of builders who, are building for a profit. I think people who need to buy a home, want to buy homes, have to maybe look at more creative ways of buying those homes. For instance, going in with another family, finding a joint venture, just looking at other ways to get homes other than waiting for the government to throw money at them. And not that that's bad, but there have to be more creative ways to buy them.
I think affordable housing in Calgary, for those people that really need it, is a very, very complex issue. I don't agree with something like assigning a whole block as quote-unquote project housing. I think there needs to be a creative solution that's going to make everybody happy. Will that ever happen? I don't think so. I think developers are really scant to believe that putting up a mixed-use building with affordable and regular housing is going to give them any profit. The city will have to step up, and Mayor Nenshi is just the type of guy to step up and say, okay, this next block, if you want to develop it, has to be mixed affordable housing.
Hey Calgary, welcome back. Tonight we're discussing affordable housing in our city. Now Sarah, I cut you off there before the speakers.
Yes. Well, I was just interested that we were talking a lot about financial capital, like people's kind of money in their investment in their homes and how much it costs. And I was thinking one of the pieces that the co-op model offers is social capital. And so that's something you get very, uniquely in a co-op setting that you don't necessarily get in a suburban model, because you know your neighbors, and there's a much more kind of emphasis on that community. You govern your community together, you make decisions together, you socialize together, and so you're getting a different kind of benefit, a different capital than you might, just worrying about, how much it costs for me to live there, or how much.
Well, to those who might not quite understand the full, and frankly, I'm not so sure I understand the full gamut of it myself. Explain how the co-op works from start to finish.
So where I live is a co-housing cooperative, so it's a slightly different model in that it's an equity model. We own our own units, but co-housing is developed with intentional neighborhood and a smaller ecological footprint. So we each have our own units, but we also have shared common space that's been developed, a common kitchen, dining room, and lounge, which is large enough for everybody. So that's a co-housing cooperative. A traditional cooperative is you own the whole, you have shares in the whole co-op. Yep. You don't have an equity investment in your particular unit, but it also has an emphasis on connection, community, and citizenship. I mean, we think that co-op should be Nenshi's best friend, because Nenshi is all about citizen engagement and citizens learning how to be active, and co-ops are democratic. One member, one vote, and so housing co-ops are training people up in what it means to be responsible owners and folk who are organizing their living environment together.
I love the sense of community, I'm sure, that it must spawn.
It does. I mean, there's a different kind of connectedness when you've solved problems together and you've worked together. You have a different kind, and played together. Yeah, it's different. Yeah.
Where does I've got to ask though, the startup capital, where's this money coming from?
Well, originally with housing co-ops, they were sponsored by the federal government.
Right,
so CMHC.
Nowadays.
Yeah, but nowadays the traditional housing co-ops are not happening because there isn't CMHC money. They're not doing it anymore. So that's not happening. Prairie Sky was, we got the capital from kind of individual resources in terms of starting it up. And that was 10 years ago. Yeah.
This sounds like a pretty good, helpful hand in housing people who can,
it's
not otherwise afford.
It's challenges, though. I mean,
I
remember the folks starting it up, and it was, getting a group together and starting to put their money together, and then starting to plan. Some of the folks didn't make it to the end of that process. They kind of either got fed up, or they felt it wasn't for them in the end, and so new people had to be brought in. And then there was the construction, and then there was dealing with neighbors and all that sort of. So this one was the first one in Calgary, Prairie Sky, and it survived a lot of people saying no, it's never going to happen, but it's there in 10 years, and it's really, really great. So we need to do more of that, but the kind of folks that vulnerable Albertans aren't able to access that model because they don't have enough equity to begin with. So they're looking for the rental opportunities in this city, and the secondary suites are an affordable rental opportunity, and it's not here in any great numbers, nor are traditional rental apartments here in any great numbers. You'd think we would have more apartments because We have the highest apartment cost in all of Canada.
A good place to have.
Yeah, you would think, well, private people would put their money into apartments, but it's not happening. It's putting it into condos.
It's coming. There's more apartments being built.
A lot of the pension funds now are supporting the construction of apartments, but they're not going to be necessarily affordable.
And
that's the issue. And one of the problems is construction costs. But back to the point about secondary suites, for example. I live in Garrison Woods. I bought my house specifically because it was an R2 lot, and we were forced by Canada Lands to build an apartment above our garage. Right. And I didn't think it was a force. I thought for sure. Now you go to the other side, and as soon as an idea catches on, more developers will do it. More housing builders will do it. I think it's a model that you have to try it. So I'm with you. We do rent it out. In fact, my daughter's fencing coach lives up there, and he gets a great deal. It's very affordable. Yeah, and the reason being, again, I've got someone who can help watch my house for one thing. There's no impact. There's this fencing coach. There's no impact, but there's no impact on the neighborhood. I have a 2-car garage. He parks on the street. There's no added load. People who are afraid of the secondary suite problem, I'm only afraid about the fire code and somebody getting hurt. If I was a landlord, if I was renting out my basement, I'd be most concerned about someone getting hurt.
We've seen that.
I'm not concerned about the added density. It's a very minor impact. It has very little impact on the community. I think that's one solution.
So what would you say to aldermen who are kind of wrestling with this
over and over and over again? And I think Nancy's coming forward with a small incremental change around LRT stops and bus transit zones, where they'll and institutions, post-secondary institutions, where there'll be kind of zones around them. Say within 2 kilometers, you can have secondary suites. What would you say to those people?
I'd say to those aldermen, they're already living there. You may as well approve it. Right. In other words, around Mount Royal College, I'm sure everybody's got a lodge. Not everybody, but a lot of people have a lodger. So I mean, you're not voting for something that doesn't already exist. What you're doing is bringing it back into, let's say, the legal conformance. And I think that's the first step. So I think Nenshi would be wise to increment it. He'd be wise to go to the places where it already exists and make it legal. Have the inspectors give people time to modify the suites.
What's the holdup?
What's the holdup?
Why is this not happening?
No, well, that has
you're the politician. I'm
not. That one needs to come back to council.
I think it's going to be next month that this incremental change to the zoning bylaw will happen. Hopefully it'll happen. Why isn't it happening more broadly? If that's your question, it goes back to the threat of upsetting the people who feel like their property is their right and you shouldn't be changing things.
Well, it also goes back to, I think, some of the basement suites, let's call them secondary suites, in the far suburbs aren't that efficient anyway for the renter. The renter isn't looking to be out there. So I don't think necessarily having a blanket zoning for the far, let's call it Tuscany or wherever out there, but I think with the near city zone, it only makes sense. If we're looking to densify Calgary so we don't have to build as many roads and shovel as many we should be looking at ways that already exist to just increase the density. And it's an easy fix. It doesn't take a lot of developer power. And something that we do in our attainable housing is we really provide the opportunity for people to move from rental to ownership for about the same cost as rent. What that also does is people who are moving into our units are freeing up rental vacancy.
Tell me
so
about
that's how we do
McPherson
it.
Place. This is fascinating.
Yeah, so McPherson Place
there's no down payment. It's a mortgage.
Well, it is a down payment. We've structured the down payment where essentially we bought the land from the City of Calgary, but we bought it on a long closing. So we said to the City of Calgary, we're going to borrow your land for 10 years. We're going to reduce the cost of the unit by that land value. So each unit gets a share of that land cost. We as the developer, some of us like to defer our equity and profit. We've said we won't take any profit, we won't take any equity off the table for the same period of time as we've borrowed the land. We take those two numbers together, we take those and say, here's your down payment, and essentially people are paying cost. And then we share the unit with them. So we're prepared to stand behind our product and share it with them. So if you use simple math, let's say our land and equity is worth 30%. So the purchaser gets a mortgage for 70% of the unit. They get full occupancy, they pay their mortgage on 70%. We share the unit with them. As the unit goes up in value, when they sell it, they get the first 70%. Hopefully they've made some money.
Pretty good deal.
And we'll reattach it. And after 10 years, which is about the maintenance life of a building before it needs major repairs, we transition and say anybody can buy it. So for the first 10 years, you have to meet our income qualification, our net worth qualification, you have to get a CMHC insured mortgage, and we will attach our equity as your down payment.
This sounds like a great deal. And just for our viewers, what are, I guess, some of those income qualifications?
Well, we've qualified people to be, so in a Bridgeland condo, as low as $24,000 of income. But we target people who make 80% or less of the mean average income and are also currently spending more than 30% of their income on housing. That's another big threshold. So we have everything from EMTs to nurses to planners from the City of Calgary. We have 2 of them. Because again, what we're trying to house is people that have jobs. They don't necessarily have the bank of ma and pa, and they're in what we call the rental trap. They're not able to save enough for a down payment. And as the mortgage rules got more stringent to try to slow growth, more and more people who have good earning jobs. They're good Calgarians. They're working people. I don't know why this is it works. In fact, it's legislated in London, for example, England. You can't build a project now. It's caught on so much that the entitlement that comes with your property requires you to do a certain amount of shared equity. Now, the City of London gives you some offsetting benefits, which is important.
You're going to hang me. Cut you off.
Oh, sorry.
It's a really valid point, though. Folks, our half hour is almost up. Time flies. I know after this quick break, we're going to wrap it up and ask a random question. Stay with us.
Affordable housing in Calgary, I think, is a major issue, and it's a problem that I personally don't think we should go to private companies to try to solve. I don't think that we can mandate to a company telling them that you have to have X number of affordable housing units in this particular block that you're wanting to develop, because they're in the business of making money. And if they make less money, inherently they're not going to be as interested in developing in a particular place. It's just the law of capitalism. I think it's up to citizens, the government, and charity organizations to help people in need. I think that's how we can move ahead.
Okay, now what we're going to do now, this is called the random question wrap, like I alluded to before the break. The way this works, I've got no idea what's on these cards. Okay, Sarah, you can do the honor, pick one out, pass it back to me, I'll read it, and we can all weigh in. Now, it's going to have nothing to do with what we talked about, but that's half the fun, right? Shifting gears, we call it, shifting gears.
All right.
And we can all weigh in?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
There's been news about a couple flying to Mars for $1 billion. You hear about this? The married couple to fly to Mars.
5 years.
It's going to cost about $1 billion. They're not going to get paid $1 billion, although a year alone in a 600 square foot place with your spouse might be worth $1 billion to some. Now the question is, will the marriage last the 555-day trip? What do you think?
What's the alternative?
You know what? It has to.
It has to. It may not last well, but it'll last.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. It'll last.
They're staying together for the kids.
That's right. Lots of videos. DVDs. Yeah. Do they get satellite up there?
I don't think it would work out that way.
No, I don't think it would work out
The thing that blows my mind is they're not even going to stop on Mars. You'd like to, finally get there, get out and say, I'll talk to you in a day or two.
Swing around it, don't they?
That's
Come
right.
back the other way.
Slingshot around and come on back to Earth. Yeah. Who knows? Is that $1 billion well spent?
It's not his.
No.
It's not our money.
I don't think so.
It's his money. Isn't it private money? I think it's.
Well, yeah.
Is it private money? If it's private money, great.
Yeah.
Sure, let the private guys
fill your boots.
Fill your boots.
Not the way you spend $1 billion, though, I wouldn't think.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
So what is a worthwhile way to spend $1 billion?
$1 billion?
Billion.
Affordable housing in the city.
There you go. There you go.
You can do
amazing
things.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Hopefully, we've shed some light on what is indeed an interesting issue. You can, of course, keep the conversation going on Facebook and Twitter as well. Of course, if you have a topic you want to discuss on the show, drop us a line. Let us know. Take care.